Good afternoon, everyone. I am Emerald Darwan, and welcome to Stay in Green Environmentalism during the pandemic. This webinar is organized by Make Manila Plastic Free Movement. The COVID-19 pandemic has undeniably affected all aspects of our lives, and this includes our fight for a cleaner and greener world. We invited speakers to discuss the plastic pollution, including a system change, which is becoming more of a pressing issue as we fight this pandemic. This health crisis also exposes the ill preparedness of our government with regards to adapting a new transportation system and providing safe transport for the general public. And so, we would also like to discuss the development and planning of sustainable mobility during and after the pandemic. The fight for our climate and the environment never stops, even in the face of a pandemic, and we have a big role to play in the present in order to shape the future. We are hoping to give some insights on how we can forward our environmentalism as individuals and, of course, as a collective. As we transition to the new normal, join us in finding out how we can continue to sound the alarm and make a difference for our environment. This event is brought to you by Agham Youth PUP, Alyansa Tigil Mina, Association of Geologists and Geological Engineers of Mapúa, Benilde Nature Development and Outdoor Club, Environmental Advocates Reaching Towards Humanity UST, Greenergy DLS-CSB, MUSHS Social Sciences Circle, Samahan ng Kabataang Boluntaryo ng Pilipinas, Solidarity for Environmental Education, Protection and Development Network, UST Hiraya, UP One Earth, Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, and Youth Strike for Climate Philippines. In cooperation with Ateneo Biological Organization, Agham Youth UPD, UPDCS FST Council, and UPDCS-SP FST Council, along with the different organizations with an advocacy for social justice, human rights, and the environment protection and climate justice. Special thanks to Kabataan para sa Tribong Pilipino PUP, Kabataan para sa Tribong Pilipino UPM, PUP Samahan ng mga mag-aaral sa kasaysayan, Saribuhay UPM, and UP Kabataang Pilaw sa Potasyo. Thank you for joining us today as we tackle the current state of environmental activism in this pandemic. We are all aware of how COVID-19 pandemic has affected our everyday lives. We hope that this webinar can enlighten us on the different ways on how we can continue to make an impact in fight for our climate justice. We will be having an open forum later as well, so we're encouraging everyone to participate in our discussion, to ask questions and share their views and insights regarding the matter. To start our program, I'm giving the floor to Ms. Noel Peña, Chairperson of Make Manila Plastic Free Movement, for the opening remarks.
Hello, thank you, Rave. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Noel, and it is my privilege and pleasure on behalf of our organization, the Make Manila Plastic Free Movement, to welcome you all here today. So we are excited to have you with us to participate and share in our organization's first event. We have been planning this for quite some time, and we are grateful that amidst all the stress and challenges this pandemic brings into our daily lives, you're with us here today. So thank you for coming. The Make Manila Plastic Free Movement has been around for a little over a year now, and we have been demanding systematic change in practicing individual environmentalism to aid in the fight for climate justice. We have done this by writing and signing petitions, joining protests and seminars, and doing what we can to live greener lives. But now that we find ourselves amidst a global pandemic, where we cannot take the cry for climate justice to the streets, have physical signature drives for our petitions, and do some of our greener practices anymore, what does environmentalism look like now? What we can do as environmental activists right now seems so uncertain. But one thing we can be sure of is that the fight for climate justice doesn't stop even during quarantine. Today in this webinar, Stay in Green, we'll learn about the situation of environmental activism during these trying times and find out what we can do to help in the fight for climate justice, even during quarantine. We are honored to have Ms. Marian Ledesma from Greenpeace and Ms. Keisha Mayuga from AltMobility PH as our speakers today. They will be sharing their insights from their respective fields to help us in understanding how the pandemic has affected the efforts of environmentalism. Once again, thank you all for being a part of our organization's first event, Stay in Green Environmentalism during the pandemic. We hope that this webinar will prove successful, educational, and enjoyable for everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noel. To give us an insight on plastic pollution, systems change, and sustainable living, it is my pleasure to introduce to you this afternoon's first speaker. She has devoted her time during the past couple of years in lending her voice for the organizations she believed in. In 2018, she started working for Greenpeace Southeast Asia as an assistant to the country director and as a campaign coordinator. Today, she works as zero waste and ecological agriculture campaigner, where she responds to food and waste-related developments. She also develops and implements people-powered campaigns that aim to achieve issue-focused objectives, such as public policies, phasing out of polluting practices, systemic change, and institutionalization of solutions. Please welcome Ms. Marian Ledesma.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to talk about this. I'm really honored to basically share or impart what knowledge I have. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint today. Just give me 1 second. Can everyone hear me? All right, great. And I'm going to be talking about basically plastic-free and sustainable lifestyles. But before we get to that, I do want to share some information about plastic pollution here in the Philippines and also globally. So these are some of the topics that we'll cover this afternoon. Plastic pollution, the impacts of the plastic crisis, and practical and safe ways to reduce plastic use as individuals. We're also going to be touching on a little bit on the systemic changes that we would like to implement to address the plastic crisis. So yeah, plastic pollution. You can see here on the screen, there's several facts that have been noted by different organizations here in the Philippines and also abroad. For example, here in the Philippines, Gaia, one of our partners at Greenpeace, is actually did a study 2 years ago, and based on their study, they could approximate how many plastic sachets, shopping bags, and also thin film bags Filipinos use on a daily basis. And in the country, we have at least 163 million plastic sachets being used every day. So that's a pretty crazy number when you think about it, considering our population and just the scope of the problem really of plastic pollution in the country. It also shows us really how our sachet culture, yung kultura ng tingi-tingi, can contribute to plastic pollution. But at the same time, we also have to think about it and not put blame on the consumers or the users of these sachets, but really look at holding corporations accountable. Because when you look at it, these consumers are just utilizing what's being given, what's being provided, and the options that are available to them. The corporations that have all these resources to basically do a lot of R&D and also the capacity to explore alternative delivery systems really have to take responsibility for plastic pollution from their end to make sure that we do have alternatives so that we don't have to constantly rely on the single-use packaging that they use for their products. In 2012, you can also see just how much Filipinos have to spend on waste management. So in Metro Manila alone, our local governments have already spent, and this was 8 years ago, 4.2 billion pesos just on managing our waste. If you think about it, 8 years on, I'm sure it's already ballooned, and definitely during the pandemic, it has risen, not just in cost, but also in volume. just because a lot of people are now confined to their homes, and we've seen a lot of trends that have increased in using food deliveries or takeouts, and also online retail. And it's a pretty mind-blowing sum, I guess you could say, because they're basically utilizing Filipino taxpayers' money to handle the waste management problem, when we have so many other solutions that could be put in place to put that money to better use. And specifically for the pandemic, the third fact is an estimate that one organization did, and they estimated that for each month, about 129 billion disposable masks and 65 billion disposable gloves are being used globally. And it's really concerning, I guess you could say, when disposable PPEs are always being promoted as the safest option, when really reusable PPEs have been found to be just as safe. And the last thing I wanted to say about plastic pollution is, yeah, it's a systemic and global issue. I know that sometimes in the coverage of news, it's always portrayed as this very regionalized problem. We're always looking at it from our national perspective. And while that's not a bad thing, because there's a lot we can do from our country, it's important not to forget that plastic pollution or the plastic crisis is a systemic and global issue. And different parts or different points of the life cycle of plastics really does cause a lot of problem. And these kinds of issues aren't really isolated to just one region or one country. I know a lot of news agencies or websites love to point out these statistics about how the Philippines is, for example, ranked third as one of the biggest contributors to plastic waste in the oceans, when really they forget to mention just how systemic the problem really is. And it's not the fault of just one country, but it involves several different nations, different entities, and it really has to be responded to on a systemic level. So this slide just basically shows us the plastic pollution life cycle and how at different stages of plastic's life and how it's being produced, it already has very bad or negative health impacts as well as environmental impacts. So for one, its connection also to climate is something that sometimes gets overlooked or isn't really discussed often. So for example, yeah, plastic basically comes from fossil fuels, and from stage one of its life, it's already pollutive and it's already destructive and harmful. From extraction, you already get a lot of ecosystems that are disrupted and damaged. Then when we go to production, what happens is there's a lot of toxic chemicals that are being used to create these plastics, to create these polymers. And that also entails a lot of emissions that are coming from these factories producing them. Then you have all the emissions that are being created when they're transported to their point of sale, and then the waste being generated when consumers utilize these plastics. And we also can't forget the waste industry. A lot of companies now are basically utilizing or taking advantage of the plastic pollution problem so that they can make their own profit. And they've made it so impossible really, or really difficult for us to address the pollution, because us not being able to reduce waste is a plus for them. Basically, it's something that they would be able to earn from, and they would make a ton of money as long as we're generating the waste. And that waste industry includes things like waste importation, which is definitely a problem here in the Philippines, since we don't have a waste import ban, and we haven't ratified the Basel Ban Amendment. And that means we can still receive a lot of hazardous waste coming from other countries. And that is not just an environmental issue, because these wastes that are supposedly recyclable really are just mixed waste that aren't meant for recycling facilities, or sometimes they get contracted out to these companies that aren't licensed recycling facilities. They're just basically backyard facilities that end up either burning the waste or just treating them as if they were meant for dump sites, and that potentially endangers a lot of communities surrounding these facilities. So yeah, we're already sort of trapped in that waste industry, or a very exploitative industry. Then the last stage of plastic pollution really is about dumping and burning. We already have a lot of landfills that have reached max capacity, and yet we're still receiving a lot more waste from abroad and also generated from our cities. And sadly, even though we already have existing laws like the Clean Air Act and RA 9003, which is the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, there are proponents that are constantly trying to get incineration passed. And contrary to what they say, really, incineration isn't the solution to our waste management problems. Incineration actually presents more public health issues than it does resolve them. So when we think about solutions to plastic pollution, what are they exactly? And these are the systems change that we want to introduce to resolve the systemic issue. So there's three things basically that we would like to see to change the plastic crisis landscape here in the Philippines. The first thing is that we would need real strong bans against single-use plastic products and its production. And we're seeing a lot of these plastic bans popping up in different cities. And there's actually a single-use plastic ban that's being discussed in Congress now. But more than that, or beyond having these passed, we really need to see enforcement. There's a lot of details that go into it, but if we don't see proper implementation of these laws once they're passed, it's sort of a moot point, basically. And what these bans would do, basically, is to reduce plastic waste at its source, instead of just promoting a lot of solutions that are what we would call end of pipe. Basically, are solutions that are addressing the problem now that it's already there in our communities. So having that legislation in place in our cities and also on a national level would really help to reduce waste and also encourage a lot of people to make lifestyle changes that would complement a zero waste world. Sorry about that, that's our dog. Yeah, what's the next one is also asking corporations to do it. So for example, making those shifts also can't just fall on people and our government. The corporations that actually produce these plastics have to do their part, basically. And how can they do that? There's a bunch of ways that they can reduce plastic in our communities. For one thing, they can shift to alternative delivery systems. And these are, for example, reuse and refill systems. We've seen some companies already starting it. Usually they're SMEs, small to medium enterprises, but we've also seen bigger chains take it on. And that's a really, really positive development. In other countries, they actually have companies that just supply bigger corporations with alternatives so that they can have reusable packaging. An example of that is Loop. Here locally, what we have are SMEs that already provide refill systems. So you can get your basic necessities and a lot of food products without packaging. And then you can have the option to just use them on an affordable volume, basically. And it's actually something that Greenpeace would like to explore more, because we also want to break that that misconception that being zero waste or going plastic free is an unrealistic goal for many of our fellow Filipinos. And we wanted to sort of break that misconception, basically, because when you look at historically, when you looked at our practices, buying from sari-sari stores, we used to actually utilize those reuse and refill systems. So you would go to your sari-sari stores and bring along your jars for your oil, for suka, toyo, and that was being done way back then. And it can be done now at different levels, from big corporations also to smaller SMEs. Another thing that corporations can do is they sort of have to take responsibility for their waste. It's called extended producer responsibility. And basically that would mean including in our laws or in our policies to make sure that those who produce the plastic packaging or those who produce plastic products will ultimately be responsible for the waste that they're producing. For example, they would have to bear the costs of waste management if their products are seen in the waste stream, or they would have to implement practices to take care of that on their own if they're not willing to bear the cost of the municipal waste management system. And yeah, another thing that we do ask corporations to do is to phase out single-use plastic in their operations. And that means packaging, that means products where available to shift them to sustainable alternatives, and also to make sure that their processes don't have harmful impacts, especially if they're shifting to alternatives that are also coming from finite resources. That's something that I think we also have to be careful about when we're talking about alternatives. For example, if a corporation were to shift from plastic packaging to paper, we would have to make sure that it's a sustainable source, or possibly even ask them to innovate further so that the packaging doesn't shift from one kind of waste, for example, plastic, to just making more waste from, for example, paper or a different alternative. And the last thing, this is sort of at the end point already of plastics life cycle, but we do want to see a lot of cities implementing zero waste approaches when they're managing their municipal waste. And that means more recycling programs, also making sure that segregation is in place so that biodegradable waste or food waste can be composted and then ultimately reused by our food producers in their processes of growing food. And then making sure that the residuals, residual waste that are, those are basically waste that aren't compostable or aren't recyclable, they're minimized to a point that they can be managed sustainably. But for individual use, what we do, I mean, individual sort of changes, we also promote a lot of other things. For example, if you want to reduce your plastic use on a personal level or a household level, we would encourage people to start supporting zero waste SMEs. Examples of these are places that allow container swaps or accept reusable containers when you're filling up for goods or liquids, for example. SMEs that have refill stations in place. And I see that a lot of people are from different places. We're starting to see zero waste stores popping up all over the Philippines, from Mindanao to Visayas to Luzon. Although, yeah, there have been much more of a concentrated number here in NCR. It's great to see a lot of efforts too in other regions. For example, some you can find online. Some are also in here, advertise themselves as your typical zero waste store, but they're actually practicing a lot of zero waste practices, and refill and reuse are just some of them. if you look at the bottom pictures, you'll see examples from actual zero waste stores. The first one is actually from a sari-sari store in Negros. The second one is an online store that accepts reusable containers and refills your containers when you send them to their store, and then they refill them and then send them back to you. They do practice to minimize their carbon emissions. For example, they do practice that it's done in bulk so that you're not constantly sending your containers. So they do stock up on containers and then you can just swap it out. Another thing is you can also explore stores that don't have plastic packaging or plastic products. So you'll see more soap and shampoo bars there instead of liquids, for example, that would need plastic packaging. And another thing you can do, so for the last two pictures, there's are sort of symbolic for deliveries that don't have plastics. I know it's really hard right now, considering that some of us aren't allowed to leave our homes. If we do have to get deliveries, for example, it would be good to leave the messenger or, for example, your Grab driver or whatever, just leave them a note, and usually they'll be able to comply and ask the establishments to leave out, for example, plastic cutleries or a lot of plastic packaging in their food deliveries and also in online retail. Some companies have been pretty flexible about making sure that it's plastic-free packaging when they deliver it. I used to order during the ECQ vegetables from a company, and they first send it out in plastic bags, but as long as you left a message that, oh, I don't want plastic in my delivery, they either send them out in boxes or in reusable containers that I just return to the driver after putting them in our home containers. Another thing is also utilizing delivery systems that are more flexible about the packaging. So there's this one store where they don't have any plastic packaging, and the local delivery system that they're using also accepts packages as it is. So unlike the bigger chains, for example, like LBC or what Lazada uses, where they wrap it with a secondary plastic packaging, that smaller company accepts packages as is. And this one, I think most of you already practice. It's just basically having your own kit where you have essentials. And I do also want to say that in the interest of being practical and realistic, I don't really encourage buying new goods that are meant to be to sort of feed into that zero waste lifestyle. But you can also be zero waste without having to buy new, and that just means utilizing what you have at home, your regular baon boxes, your own spoon and forks. They don't have to be the ones that are flipping clothes or what. They don't have to be fancy alternatives. And yeah, straws, you can use your bamboo straws or whatever straws that you already have at home that aren't disposable, and your typical water bottles and traditional bags also, like bayongs, are also sort of coming back as when you go marketing or when you go out. And I do realize that people have concerns about reusables during this time of COVID. And what scientists have basically shown, and what health experts have been saying for a while now, is that reusable equipment aren't less safe than disposable ones or plastic ones, just because these equipment actually sort of hold the virus for shorter periods. For example, the virus has been known to stay on plastic surfaces for as long as 72 hours, as opposed to paper surfaces where they couldn't be detected anymore after a few hours. So, and the same goes for cloth and glass surfaces. These are things that may carry the virus temporarily for a few hours, but they're built or designed to be washed and disinfected continuously. Unlike plastic, which are mostly made to be disposable and thrown away, these equipment or these materials basically can be disinfected with soap and water, or they can be disinfected simply by boiling. And that's a more practical and safe way to go about your day, and also making sure that you're reducing your plastic waste. And the last thing I think that we talk about for being plastic free, since we have noted this rise of, for example, a lot of PPEs or face masks that are coming up as disposable. With these increasing trends, it makes more sense basically to be using reusable masks, not just from an environmental perspective, but also from a perspective of cost efficiency. When you spend once for a fabric mask that's properly made, you can reuse them multiple times. So you cut down on your waste. At the same time, you don't have to keep spending for buying new masks. And there are a lot of resources out there that tell you how to properly use them and how to properly disinfect them. So basically, just by washing your mask with soap and water, and then sanitizing them with boiling, you can already assure that these reusable masks and gloves are basically disinfected. And beyond plastic, because this is a topic about staying in green, beyond plastic, what else can we do? So especially in this pandemic, it's been a big deal to start growing your own food. So urban agriculture is highly encouraged. And if you're in a less urban setting, also growing food for your community is good, because that actually reduces your carbon footprint and also provides your community with food that has produced a lot less emission than food that comes from farther away. And also industrial or commercial food does result or produce in a lot more greenhouse gases compared to food that's been organically or ecologically grown. Another thing is to shop local and buy fresh. When I say shopping local, it's like shopping at your local bakeries or shopping at your local markets, where goods are less likely to be pre-packaged. And buying fresh just means that they're of better quality, and you can already bring your own containers, and they're more flexible about it, as opposed to buying at these big chain stores where most of the food and goods are already pre-packed, and you really don't have any choice about the packaging anymore. Also during this time, sustainable shopping and waste-free gifts are, I think, a good way to minimize in general your plastic waste, and also look at supporting a lot of local communities or local establishments by providing, for example, experiential gifts or knowledge tools. For example, you can pay for, if you want to give a friend a gift, you can do online classes, pay for online classes for them. Maybe when this pandemic is over, you can provide experience gifts. For example, going on a trip instead of buying something physical or something that's been manufactured. And also sustainable shopping in a way that you can look at how products are sourced, making sure that where they're from and how they're made have been ethically done, and also basically practicing fair trade principles. So we have a lot of, I think, SMEs that partner with indigenous communities to provide goods that use natural materials. Also looking at good practices for employees that are producing these goods are important to keep in mind when you want to patronize a certain establishment or business. And then the last thing, It's also related, I guess, to the topic of waste is composting your food waste. We do generate a ton of food waste, especially now that we're all sort of confined to our homes. And that's actually a way where we can also help communities if there's community initiatives to grow food, for example, in your barangays or in your village. You can donate your food waste to these programs, and you're basically providing them with farming inputs, and at the same time reducing waste that goes to your landfills. So I think that's it. I just wanted to sort of end by inviting everybody to sign up for our Better Normal petition, and also to support the youth agenda that was presented in Congress last week. I sort of want to, you'll see more about what Greenpeace advocates for at these links. So just head over to them, act.gp/betternormal. And then for the youth agenda, it's act.gp Youth Agenda PH 2020.
Thank you for the wonderful discussion, Ms. Marian. Again, this webinar is brought to you by Agham Youth PUP, Association of Geologists and Geological Engineers of Mapúa, Benilde Nature Development and Outdoor Club, Environmental Advocates Reaching Towards Humanity UST, Greenergy DLS-CSB, MUSHS Social Sciences Circle, Samahan ng Kabataang Boluntaryo ng Pilipinas, Solidarity for Environmental Education, Protection and Development Network, UST Hiraya, UP One Earth, Youth Advocates for Climate Action Philippines, and Youth Strike for Climate Philippines.
I guess to start off the open forum, I'd like to ask, because like with since a lot of us can't afford like those really expensive those branded fabric reusable masks and all that, are DIY reusable masks like acceptable, or like are they as effective as the recommended reusable masks and all that, especially now since a lot of us can't go out and some people can't order. I find that there are so many tutorials on YouTube as well on how to make your own face mask. So I'm just wondering if that is as effective and if that's still a safe alternative.
Yeah, definitely there are some that, yeah, we have to be sort of conscious of how the masks are made, but DIY masks also can be made safely and properly. There are some tutorials out there on the web, and I can send the participants links to on ones that are basically sort of expert approved, and so that you guys can utilize it or share it also on your web pages.
Alisa is asking, how about with online shopping, like Shopee or Lazada? Does it work if you ask for plastic free? And yeah, I also have the same question, especially since puro order and all of that. Would it be all right to request for that? Would they accept that?
Actually, some of my colleagues over at Break Free from Plastic have been asking consumers and also some vendors that are basically selling through Shopee and Lazada. And some of them have said that it's already in Lazada's internal policies to wrap these deliveries in package, especially if the deliveries are being fulfilled by Lazada mismo. For working directly with or ordering directly from vendors who handle the shipping themselves, it does work. I have tried it with several vendors where I just ask for either no plastic packaging or to actually utilize, for example, if it's a liquid goods, to utilize or bigger packaging or bigger containers so that I use less plastic containers. And they have been pretty flexible about it. Pero for vendors that have deliveries fulfilled by Lazada, they say that they can't get around it. And that's something that we want to work with these online retail companies, basically. We want to make sure that Shopee and Lazada have better policies so that they work towards reducing plastic waste instead of adding more to the packaging. Like if maybe a vendor were to say that you don't need an extra protective packaging around it, then when Lazada ships it out, they don't have to use 3 different bags just to wrap that same good. And I do know that Lazada uses their own plastic packaging sometimes. So in addition to the vendor's plastic packaging, they add an extra layer. So maybe they can innovate ways where if they want to still brand the delivery, they can utilize small markers or stickers or labels instead of using an entire plastic bag. That's just sort of an example of some ways that they can innovate.
Thank you. Um, we have a question from Ives Garcia. Schools are great avenue for campaigning about the environment. Aside from education campaigns, do you have any suggestions about green practices for schools?
We actually saw one of our partners in Negros. Oh, sorry, sorry, can you hear me? We actually have a partner in Negros. So they, the same NGO that conceptualized the Zero Waste Sari Sari store, PRR CFI, they have this program called Sweep, and they've worked with a lot of schools in that area to basically reduce plastic waste. And the school has gone zero waste by utilizing reusables, using coconut husks, and also wooden spoons and forks instead of disposables in their canteens. And they've also phased out goods, for example, in the canteens that would utilize plastic packaging. So they've eliminated that. So those are just some steps that schools can do. For example, working with the company that provides services for canteens, or asking students to not take single-use plastics for their baon into the schools. And it's actually sort of coincides with policies that would encourage healthy food. Because when you're encouraging more fresh and healthy food, then you're less likely to utilize packaged snacks, sugary snacks.
Thank you. Another question from Rochelle Christian Cabig. What are your suggestions on the programs and activities we can do on our schools about environment even though it's online class?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a new change that schools have to approach. I've worked with one school where to sort of um, instill an environmental mindset in their students for their Balik Eskwela program. They did a series of webinars on just like what the organizers here did today, on how they can live sustainably and reduce their plastic waste from their homes. That's just one way to do it. For example, for webinars and modules on how to do it. Another is to implement for example, waste audits or home audits. Um, Break Free from Plastic is currently developing this methodology for its annual brand audit, where people will be able to audit their waste and look at how much they're utilizing in their homes. And that's sort of a good way to instill or to basically encourage consideration around how much waste you're producing when you're starting to count it and really starting to measure it from your homes. Another thing that has sort of popped up recently, somebody posted on our social media pages about how the learning modules that DepEd provides may have been or may be wrapped in a lot of plastic when they're being sent out to far-flung communities. And I think that's something that schools and DepEd districts have to coordinate with, so that when they're sending out these printed out learning modules, they're not wrapped in a ton of plastic that will eventually become the burden of these far-flung communities to manage.
Thank you. And for our last question from Trisha Josenia, do you think ethical consumerism is possible pa rin po?
I I think it would have to be. I think it's still possible. I'm an idealist and an optimist, so in my mind, I think it is. But we have to be. We would have to. There would be some. I don't know, sacrifices. I don't really want to say sacrifices, but yeah, there's just extra consideration that has to come. That it has to sort of play a role when you decide to buy something. So you do have to take extra time to look at um, where the products are sourced and who makes these products, and also look at, for example, the practices of the company you're buying from. Yeah, they might be sourcing, for example, um, paper or wooden goods from a sustainably certified forest, for example, but maybe they're not treating their workers right. So it's looking at it also from a holistic point of view, that if you want to have ethical consumerism, you have to think about the people that are involved, where the products are coming from, how they're being produced, so that you want to make sure that there's no impacts on the communities where these facilities are made. And I guess that's where a lot of locally made goods come into play, because you're more likely to ensure how these products are made when you know them on a community level. And I think that would also help a lot of SMEs if we started patronizing them more. And it's also the same way when you're growing your own food. Um, a sustainable food system is basically just about relationships, and I think that should go beyond how our food is made, but also look into how everyday products that we utilize are made. If you're more close, for example, to your food producer or the maker of I don't know, the maker of your bag, for example, then you care more about the work practices or the work environment that these producers are in, and you care about how they're treated in transactions of that microeconomy, like that they get paid fairly, and that as consumers you're also getting a fair price. So on like when you look at relocalizing your consumption, it actually helps a lot in making sure that there's a lot of ethics that are in place and a lot of good practices that can be assured.
So, moving forward, to give us an insight on sustainable mobility during and after the pandemic, it is a great privilege to introduce to you our second guest. She is a licensed environmental planner with over 5 years of professional experience in development communications, project, and knowledge management, and currently building over 3 years of relevant experience in sustainable mobility solutions and community-driven urban spaces. She is an economic development analyst for Asian Development Bank and an active transport specialist for AltMobility PH. She is the founder of Life Cycles PH, which mobilized over 80 volunteers dedicated to bring bicycles to frontliners as a transport solution during the enhanced community quarantine in the Greater Manila area, and provided over 1,400 bicycles to frontliners from 50 institutions, hospitals, supermarkets, LGUs, etc. within 2 months. Please welcome Ms. Keisha Mayuga.
Thank you. Oh, so kind of your silent applause. applauses. Thank you so much. I can really hear it in my heart. Thank you, thank you, Marian, really for the great talk on ways we can really change our lifestyle. And my topic is sort of like that, but it's a little bit more around moving around the city. So here, can you see my screen? Or yes, yes. All right. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about cycling towards sustainable cities. Solutions not just for now, but for the future. So, okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So before the pandemic, there was traffic. Um, it was an average of 10 days, 17 hours that we were losing in rush hour every year. And that time we could have used to plant 258 trees and solved 52 jigsaw puzzles. That's a lot of puzzles and that's a lot of trees. And so we're really, this site is not a new site for us. This is EDSA pre-pandemic. And if you see the little inset photo, that's actually me because I am a frequent bike commuter. So I've been bike commuting for the past 5 years, and that's really my main mode of transport now. And it's really one of the fastest, cheapest, and most environmentally sustainable ways to get around. So my personal big goal, really as a planner or a transport advocate, is to get people home in 30 minutes. And my personal vision is that I want to live in a city where my kids can bike safely. So if you went to EDSA pre-pandemic, that's not really the safest place for your 6-year-old child to bike. But someday we will get there. And in terms of the environment, basically more people biking means less people in cars, meaning better air quality and less GHG emissions. So right now, the Philippines is 13th in the world for deaths attributable to ambient air pollution. 3 out of 10 leading three of top 10 leading causes of death are respiratory related illnesses. And the transport sector is really one of the major sectors. 23% is a big chunk of CO2 emissions, and that's just from city transport alone. So yeah, cycling really makes it better for the environment and for everyone in general. But everything changed when the virus attacked. COVID-19 happened, and everything I was planning from last year changed, but in a strangely fast-tracked way. So people in cities adjusted, in some in good ways, some in ways that we are still trying to cope with. So if you could see the upper left photo, we started getting more mobile palenques, which is great because then people didn't need to travel so much, and that vendors also could bring their food right to the people who need them. People started working from home, as you can see from the second photo on the right. Working from home with 2 dogs as your colleagues. And then you could see also on the lower left and then the lower right, it's just much, much harder to get around in general. With the various CQs that we've been going through, it's just all confusing, but what's for sure is the virus is still out there. So on March 16, that's when they first announced there's no mass transport during ECQ. So when they announced that, I literally wept because I could just imagine all of the transport, all of the nurses, the doctors, all of the essential workers just walking for hours because they couldn't get to work. And they're the people who are literally saving our lives. So essential workers were forced to walk for hours because there was no mass transport. And some go even 10 kilometers just to get home. I even interviewed one person from the supermarket who said he hasn't gone home for 3 months because he couldn't get the courage to walk all the way home. That's 21 kilometers. That's half a marathon. So it's really a terrible crisis to face, especially because it's health related and it's transport related. So, but of course, um, we shouldn't stop there, and we shouldn't just let. So, as I was introduced, I am an active transport advocate, and how do we get around? We use different means of transport other than mass transport. So what I did was I founded Life Cycles PH, which really helped essential workers get bikes to get around and to get home. And so far, it was mentioned earlier, we've helped more than 1,400 and counting essential workers get bikes. And until now, there are still a lot of essential workers needing bikes. And the second way that we really helped was through a Facebook community where people were strangers were helping essential workers nearby by lending their bikes. Imagine just lending your bike to a total stranger, but it was just out of pure trust, out of pure bayanihan spirit. And so it's been months since this started, and yet some of the people who lent their bike actually gave their bike already to the people who needed it. So this wasn't just the only initiative. This is just one of the many other initiatives that have been going around helping a lot of our essential workers really get around. So, but now that we give bikes, what's next? We have to make it safer for our cyclists. According to MMDA, we have at least 10,000 cyclists going around on our main routes. So I personally could not stand knowing that there are 10,000 people's lives at stake and risking their lives already working and risking their lives on the road by going through unprotected bike lanes. So there have been a lot of initiatives again, this time with more of the biking community really backing this up by putting up pop-up bike lanes. Like on the upper left photo, that's Bikers United Marshals. You may know them as the people on Commonwealth, standing there if you catch them. Oh, well, you guys don't go out, but maybe you've seen photos of them with their makeshift cones and barriers and really protecting the cyclists. And from there, people started really collaborating and giving reflectors to our cyclists. More establishments started putting up bike parking spaces. The media was also very supportive, and everyone was extremely supportive. Here is DOTR's design on the lower portion on EDSA. And just this morning, I didn't get to add it to my slides, but just this morning, we made the longest stretch of pop-up bike lanes along EDSA. This is in cooperation with the government, but also a lot of cycling groups. So that stretch ran from Aurora Boulevard all the way to Magallanes on the southbound side. That's 10.6 kilometers, and that's around 30 volunteers making sure that our cyclists are safe. So there are really so many ways to promote cycling. It's not just a nice to have at this moment, but it's a need to have because it's one of the main modes of transportation. While even if mass transport comes back on our streets, it's still not going to be at full capacity. So one of the ways to really address getting around in the city is to encourage people to bike and to give them protected bike lanes. So that's what we've been doing. This is not just the cycling groups, but this is also with different active transport coalitions like Move As One Coalition, the Bicicleta Pilipinas Coalition, and of course AltMobility. So it's really a lot of people doing this. So what are some things that we can learn from this? One is cooperation is key, top down and bottom up is great all around. So as advocates, we really wanted to push for pop-up bike lanes, but of course we need coordination with the authorities, and actually working together made it faster, made it better, and made it something that could be sustained in the long run. So cooperation is key, from the bottom up, working with the top down. Next, we can do so much with the technology we have now. So if you remember, I mentioned life cycles PH earlier. Everything, all of the, I reached, I think, 2 months in, 2 million pesos, 2 million pesos in, 2 months in, and around 800 bikes distributed. And I did it without leaving my place. So I didn't leave my house. And there's just so many ways you can innovate with just the use of technology. And even having this event is amazing because you're really promoting more people to think about things environmentally, even from their homes, because you can do that. So there's just so much you can do with the technology we have now. And lastly, plan for the kind of future city that you want and take action and make conscious choices. So right now you can't really get around because it's we don't know what CQ it is now, but really the best kind of city is one that you can travel with in freedom. And one of the best ways, and one of my favorite ways really is to get around, is by biking. And it's really a conscious decision. I know maybe some of you are like, oh, biking, what's that? But I haven't biked since I was a kid, etc. But or I don't know how to bike, but this is really, I'm telling everyone, this is really the best time to get into it. And it's not just biking. If you want to do electric kick scooter, that's cool too. Or if you want to skateboard or do other sustainable mobility activities, like active transport, that would really make a huge difference. Imagine going along one stretch of EDSA and there's just one lane full of people on bikes, on their electric kick scooters, skateboarding, etc. That's really cool. Like you can't, like maybe last year thinking like skateboarding along EDSA, that's so wild. Like who would ever do that? But we are closer to that kind of possibility now because of how active the community has been throughout this unfortunate period. But we made the most of it. So we can plan for the kind of future city that we want and take action. And speaking of taking action, like what can I do now? I'm at home, or I want to stay safe. There are different ways that you can really help. What can we do to promote a better normal? Lend out your bike. So these are just some of the people who benefited from Life Cycles PH. The one on the leftmost actually borrowed a bike from our Facebook community, and he was able to give a vaccine to a baby. That's what the power of lending your old bike can do. Can literally save lives. And these other two are also essential workers who received bike donations from Life Cycles PH, and they're able to get home and work now since March. If they didn't even get that before, they would be walking for how many months now? 5 months now. But with a simple bike, they were able to do their jobs and have their livelihood. And another way you can help, you can actively participate in these online discussions like what we're having now. Like one of AltMobility's is On the Way episodes. So that is, we talk about different topics on transportation, and there's one that's coming up on 20th. So, but that's also going to be posted on the Facebook page, but it's good that you know about the issues of transport. So just your luck. Also, the topic for for the one on 20th will be an active transport. Another way you can help is be a Move as One advocate. So you can learn more about the movement by visiting the Facebook page or the link over there on step one. And then you can talk about it with your friends and family, and you can be a public advocate. And you can express also if you want to volunteer, you can just message our page. And if you really, really want to promote active transport in your own barangay or LGU, you can ask your LGU to start thinking about putting up an active transport team or putting up bike lanes in your area. So this DOH actually released an active transport playbook, which includes a sample ordinance for your cities or your municipalities to adopt. So it's literally just plug and play, and they can modify a bit. But this is a great guide for LGUs to really start with. So if you're interested, you can message me and I can give you a copy of this so that you can talk about it also with your respective city or municipality administrator. Yeah, so with that, let's make better cities for a better normal. We don't want to be stuck in traffic again when things have calmed down. We want a better normal where we can imagine our kids and even our lolas biking along EDSA. So thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Keisha, for that very insightful discussion. It is true that we can do so much with our technology right now, and we should make the most out of it. Once again, this event is organized in cooperation with Ateneo Biological Organization, Agham Youth UPD, UPD-CS FST Council, and UPD-CSSP FST Council. We would also like to give special thanks to Kabataang para sa Tribong Pilipino PUP, Kabataang para sa Tribong Pilipino UPM, PUP Samahan ng mga mag-aaral ng kasaysayan, and UP Kabataang Pilo sa Potasyo. At this juncture, we are now entertaining questions for Ms. Keisha Mayuga. Please give us a signal before turning on your microphone or send the question via chat box. Thank you!
Hello. Can I ask?
Yeah.
I'm one of the people who don't know how to bike. I've lived in Metro Manila my whole life. So is it too late for me, or is it for me to advocate for bike lanes? Is that reasonable or something?
Yeah, totally, definitely. And it's not too late to bike. I also, before the pandemic, I used to teach people how to bike, and the oldest I've taught, I think, was 63 years old, and she was able to bike. So it's really not too late to bike. And you can still advocate for bike lanes, of course. If you really want, you can do a scooter, or not even the electric kind of scooter. Any kind of active transport is good. But yeah, it's totally, it's not like contradicting. It's still like pretty good. It's okay. So, but if you do want to bike, hopefully we'll have spaces for people who don't know how to bike to start learning. So maybe soon, maybe sooner than later. So yeah, thanks for asking.
We have a question from Renda Lateo. How do you think cities with narrow roads implement safe, active transport?
That's a good question. I'm actually part of AltMobility PH. So we have a Metro Cebu workshop, and that's actually the number one question from all of the municipalities and cities. How can we make a bike lane out of this narrow road? Well, we do have models. I would show you, but it's somewhere buried. But we do have models where we create slow streets. And there are different ways to go about narrow roads. So if it's like a 2-lane road, you can make it a 1-lane car road, and then the rest you can make it into a bike lane or an active transport lane, or even a sidewalk, because those are also not pretty common. um, or you can make them into slow streets. So cars will have to comply with slower speeds, up to 20 kilometers per hour, so that people on bikes and people on active transport and walking can travel safely along those roads. So those are just some of the ways, some of the creative ways. If I could personally do it myself, I would close down the road. But that's kind of a radical idea for some of our city administrators. But it's possible. There have been examples in different cities where it's a 10-lane road, and then they totally just closed it down and made it an open space for everyone to use publicly. So it's possible with the right kind of clamoring and the right kind of will. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Rendell.
In regards po to my other question, ay yung parang I think one thing din na kaya hindi masyado na yung bike lanes in Metro Manila is a lot of my generation who don't know how to use a bike anymore. I actually asked some of my members, parang they agreed with me, like, oh, they don't know how to use a bike also.
Yeah, it's well, again, I wouldn't even like really completely put you at fault. I guess I was in my generation. I'm not that much older than you guys, okay? But anyway, millennials. But yeah, admittedly, I used to, the streets that I biked in or that I learned to bike in were not as traffic as it is now, and it's totally understandable. Like parents would be like, "Really, you're gonna bike in that traffic? I'm not gonna teach you how to bike." Or in cities now, it's really hard to learn because there's no space. But again, it's not too late. You can even pick up your active transport of choice. It's really, you can start with a scooter. I think that's easier. Or you can start by walking. I guess everybody can walk or like travel. So that's the simplest active transport actually. So maybe I didn't emphasize it enough also, but walking is one of the things that we should also emphasize when talking about active transport, because that's something that everyone can do, right? So aside from advocating for bike lanes, also proper proper sidewalks and proper pedestrian crossing lines. So you could advocate for that. It's easier to relate to at this moment, but yeah, you can choose your active transport of choice. Other questions?
PM Alvarez, you can unmute yourself and you can ask. Go ahead.
Hello, yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to change my name tag, but that's okay. I'm Migs, and I'd like to ask because I've just read about the Movers One the frequently asked questions, and I I mean I scanned through the 110 billion urban mobility support package proposal.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
my question, I think personally, I think a lot of people are more inclined to take to use private vehicles, and less of the walking and the cycling and public transport, because they really don't have that much of an option. And it has been established in the country that if you want to be able to move around efficiently, you have to have your own car. And I'm curious because it's like one of the one of the one of the one of the proposed solutions is to sustain a safe public transport by investing 30 billion and engaging thousands of PUBs nationwide. So, is this more of a safety net for PUB drivers and owners, or is this more of an effort towards the um, public towards the shifting of transport systems into a more public ownership? And the plan as a whole for the 110 billion urban mobility support package, is this the end game, or is this an effort towards a transition to a much better general transport system in our country? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, and those are pretty valid. And yes, to answer your last question first, uh, yes, it's actually the move to transition into better mobility because, as you've mentioned, everyone's very, very dependent on cars. Like, I wouldn't blame you. Maybe like 5 years ago, one of my goals was to own my own car. Um, and I can't blame most of you for thinking that too. But right now, we're shifting. We're trying to shift that kind of mindset because if everybody wanted cars in our country, if the 15 million people of Metro Manila wanted cars, I don't think we'll be able to move anymore. So, because it's gonna be like a parking lot everywhere, not just EDSA, everywhere. Everywhere there's a road. So that 110 billion package that we have been proposing is not just for active transport. A lot of it is actually through prioritizing public utility vehicles. And one of the initiatives really of MOVAS One is um, service contracting. Now, it's a huge discussion, but just to make it a little bit summarized, right now, our PUVs, our buses, and our jeeps, they are working on a boundary system, meaning they need to collect as much passengers because that's their pay. That's basically how it works. And if they don't have a lot of passengers, they get less pay for that day, etc. So that's how it's been working before the pandemic. But now it's even more difficult because one, they're not plying the roads, and two, when they are allowed to ply the roads, there's not as much passengers also because it's a 50% or even less capacity. And it's not just buses and jeeps facing this crisis, it's also trains because they can't also, the capacity for trains is just even less. So what service contracting would do would have an entity, maybe an LGU, maybe the DOTR, to pay these operators of jeepneys and buses so that they can fly certain routes. So that means that the drivers, they get regular pay, like they're an actual employee, and they get benefits, etc. And they don't have to fight for passengers, and they still have a wage, no matter how it is. So it's sort of like if you're familiar with how the P2P works, it's sort of like that, right? Like it doesn't have to be full or what. They're still gonna keep going because that's how the operator works. They get regular pay, and so that's one of the proposals that we're trying to put um, forward into the Senate and the Congress. And we've been constantly fighting for this and watching over how the development of that is. So with that kind of scheme, it's going to be easier also for us when once it starts easing up to travel because not everyone has cars, and maybe will be something like Singapore, where they really do use service contracting. And you know, like when you take a bus there or public transport there, it's like, yeah, that's the best way to get around. And that's what we're trying to aim to do here in the Philippines. So yeah, this is really a transition period, not just for our transport, but for everything. And because we don't want to go back to the old normal. That's why we have hashtag better normal to define what we want. And those are really some of the ways we could do it, is to improve public transport and to promote active transport. So yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you for also factoring in the plight of like the plight of the PUV drivers and owners in your answers. Thank you.
We have a question from Megan Gozum. Hello, Miss Keisha. Given the way NCR cities and main roads are built and planned, do you believe that our current main roads, EDSA, etc., can accommodate the volume of commuters, bikers, private vehicle owners, etc., with the help of the government? Do you think that our cities would benefit from road widening, sidewalk building projects for main roads in the long run?
That's a great question, and it's a question we're always also asked. So, currently, at what's built, especially EDSA, there's really we've talked to the government about this, and there's really limited ways we could modify the road, because there are actually a lot of steps to building a road. You have to acquire the land, the right of way, etc. There's just so many things that goes to it, and that's a new road. But when it's an existing road like EDSA, for example, it's you kind of have to work with what we have at the moment. I think it could accommodate everyone getting around if most of the car drivers shift into public transport or active transport. So I was telling you earlier, I was on EDSA actually guarding the bike lanes, and there were a lot of people. I lost count actually just for the first 20 minutes. There were 200 people who passed along Bonnie Serrano on EDSA. That's 200 people in 20 minutes. And that's kind of wild, because imagine those 200 people if they were in cars. That's 200 cars or something like that. So we really could. There is enough space for our roads if we plan it properly. If we imagine it not to be populated by cars. If we imagine like 80 people can fit in a bus. But imagine that as 80 cars. There's this graphic that always goes around, like what it looks like for 80 people in cars, what it looks like for 80 people in a bus, or 80 people biking. So that's really my favorite, one of the best ways to illustrate how we could really make use of the space more efficiently. Sorry, I'm just like reading your question just in case I didn't answer it. But yeah, the government has a big role here because they own the roads. So they own the roads, and they also take care of the roads, and they're also in charge of the enforcement. And so they have a big role in it. But with the help of transport groups like AltMobility, like MUSHS One, we are actually working hand in hand with them to make the transition possible. Because one of their fears before was, no, the public's not gonna like that, because car drivers are gonna super hate that bike lane. But in fact, a lot of car drivers love it now. I mean, now that we're doing it. So we just have to kind of, slowly convince them of of like the better ways we could live instead of the old ways that we used to do. So we're really working hand in hand. It's a big role, and being an advocate is also one of the ways that has pushed our views on transport, especially now. So yeah, do you think that cities would benefit from more road widening? Road widening depends. Is it for bikes? But road widening, imagine it's like a stream of water here, and then you just like scrape that up, it's still traffic, or it still has a flow of water. It's the same. So it just looks like when you widen the road for cars, for a moment, it just looks like it's a little less traffic, but it's eventually going to be traffic. I watched that happen to Katipunan as it widened through the years. So it doesn't really do much. It just convinces more cars that, hey, that this seems like a wider road because they widened it. So, but it's still traffic, definitely. So you can widen the roads or even make use of the space that we have now for other means of transport. And that's how to not get stuck in traffic. Yeah. Okay, anything else?
We are
Interesting
entertaining
questions.
one more question.
Okay, go ahead. Anything about transport, guys? Doesn't have to be bikes.
I guess I've been thinking whether or not I should ask this question because I guess it's more like, as you mentioned earlier, that another form of active transport is walking, and I find that walking is actually very enjoyable, and I think that it should be more of an option for as a means of transport. I actually really miss walking a lot because in UPLB the campus is so big and you walk everywhere. So I just I just want to ask, like, I don't think that the Philippines right now is kind of walk friendly, like especially with the heat and our weather and all of that. And I see that other countries, people walking is the norm, and rather than bikes and all that. So I just would like to ask, even if it's like a very radical or a very like culture change or whatever, just how do you think we can make the Philippines more walker friendly?
Yeah, that's great. Actually, um, walking, I love walking also. Most of the time, I don't even like, it's so short, I don't bring my bike. So, and contrary to everyone's belief, I think the Philippines does have a walking culture. You just don't notice it because where are we doing it in? Malls. So that we walk a lot in malls, we don't notice. But I notice it because I have like a step counter. So, yeah, how do we make it more walkable? We actually encourage more public spaces, not just malls, but actual parks. We also should get more into mixed use development. So the reason why people take their cars or like, take a grab or wherever is because things are so far away. So if you make things like mobile markets or parks that are near you, I will encourage you to just walk by your closest sari store or walk to your nearest park instead of taking transport, because that's really one of the ways to reduce it is to avoid long travels. Um, we can also encourage more walking by planting trees, quite simply. It's the best infrastructure investment out there. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to there's no engineering involved. All you have to do is plant it. And there you go. Years later, you have a row of trees that's, helping not just people walking, but people biking and, just generally helpful for everyone. So, yeah, we can also make our sidewalks a lot wider, definitely. We have a right, really, to walk everywhere. Maybe except expressways, because you can't get in there. But in your cities, you can and you should be able to walk. So just to wrap it up, yes, we have to improve on our planning and our encourage mixed use planning, meaning make things closer to you, like make your everyday errands 10 minutes or 15 minutes away from you. Next is to really to have also part of it is building parks. Next, what did I say? Okay, next is really to plant trees. I mean, that would be really helpful, guys. It's one of my favorite ways of activism is to plant trees. And then lastly is the demand for more for better sidewalks from your barangay or whoever. Like if you see a driveway, say, hey, you know what? I have a right to walk here, and we all like from Brooklyn say like, I'm walking here, mga ganun. So yeah, you can clamor in your own localities for better sidewalks and better walking facilities. So that's it. I hope that more people do walk. Even like not if you can't cycle. I mean everyone. I said earlier, everyone can walk, or almost everyone. So yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Mayuga, for answering our queries. Once again, transportation is truly both health and environmental related. It is important to support the sustainable forms of mobility during and after the pandemic. We should continue our calls for mass transport and for safe bike lanes for our cyclists. Once again, thank you, Ms. Mayuga. And we would like to call on Ms. Alisa Beldat, the head of this event, to award the certificates for our speakers today. Thank you.
So, hello. I would like to present the certificate of appreciation to Ms. Marian Ledesma for imparting her invaluable insight to the Make Manila Plastic Free Movement members during the Stay in Green Environmentalism during the pandemic, given this 22nd August of 2020 via Zoom. So, and to Ms. Keisha, this certificate is presented to Ms. Keisha Mayuga for imparting her invaluable insight to the Make Manila Plastic Free Movement members during the Stay in Green Environmentalism during the pandemic. So both certificates are not yet signed for the safety of our e-signatures, but when we will email it, we will email it to you signed. So can we take a short picture? Okay, so one, two, three. Okay. So while you read this here.
To end our program, we are giving the floor to Mr. Timothy Laranang, Vice Chairperson of Make Manila Plastic Free Movement, to give his closing remarks.
Hello. So, first off, thank you sa ating mga speakers, kay Ms. Marian at kay Ms. Keisha for their wonderful insight regarding their respective fields and respective advocacies regarding zero waste and transport sector ng Philippines. So, next, I would like to thank yung team natin dito for yung execution event. So, project head si Elisa and lahat ng mga tumulong sa paggawa ng event na ito. I would also like to thank yung ating mga attendees from our different partner organizations, since they have been really supportive sa ating event na ito, and without them, this wouldn't be as successful as it has been today. Siguro, I would just like to point out na we really are very privileged ngayong araw na to hear yung insights nila Miss Marian and nila Miss Keisha regarding sa mga pinag-usapan nila. And hindi lahat tayo, I guess, ang nakakuha ng information na ganito that could give us brand new ideas, so to speak, regarding how we can change or instigate change sa ating society. So, I guess pinaka message ko lang here is to use the knowledge that we gained from today's seminar to take action, no matter sabihin na how small, no matter how little you may think it is. Kasi ultimately, these things matter in the long run. So please, let's use our resources, whether it be financial, social, or other resources, para to create change. And also, we must hold institutions that are accountable sa mga different na bagay na related sa environment, sa transport, and other sectors ng society. So, at the end of the day, we must always ask ourselves, who are we fighting for, and for whom do we want the change to happen? Is it for the few or for the many? So that's all. Thank you once again to everyone involved, and yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Timothy. We thank you for all for joining us today in our Stay in Green Environmentalism during the pandemic webinar. Thank you for our speakers for dedicating their time and effort to share their wonderful insights for us today. We would like to thank the following organizations for sponsoring this event: Agham Youth PUP, Association of Geologists and Geological Engineers of Mapúa, Benilde Nature Development and Outdoor Club, Environmental Advocates Reaching Towards Humanity UST, MUSHS Social Sciences Circle, Greenergy DLS-CSB, Samahan ng Kabataang Boluntaryo ng Pilipinas, Solidarity for Environmental Education, Protection and Development Network, UST Hiraya, UP One Earth, Youth Advocate for Climate Action Philippines, and Youth Strike for Climate Philippines, in cooperation with Ateneo Biological Organization, Agham Youth UPD, UPD CSFST Council, UPD CSSP Council. And special thanks to Kabataang para sa Tribong Pilipino PUP, Kabataan para sa Tribong Pilipino UPM, PUP Samahan ng mga Mag-aaral ng Kasaysayan, and UP Kabataang Pilo sa Potasyo. Thank you all for joining us in discussing environmental activism during the pandemic. We are hoping that our discussions were insightful and enlightening with regards the current social political climate of our country in this pandemic. Let us continue our calls in our fight for social justice, human rights, and environmentalism and climate justice despite our current predicaments. Again, I am Emerald Darwan. Thank you all and good day.